artwork?
It works
Which comes
pretty
first,
good.
gardening or artwork?
Oh boy, yeah, I usually go in cycles. Yeah, the deadlines are what keep me going on the artwork. So I'll put it off as long as I can. Like I almost put it off with you, and you insist on. I'm glad you did. I'm glad you
kept bugging you.
insisted that I be here because I had too much going on and was, getting stretched too thin.
So you've been working on these 10 years, or working on not these, but this kind of artwork.
Yeah.
Tell me about how all that started.
Yeah. So, when I look back on it, as a kid, my parents encouraged creativity, and so it started with my mom had this huge denim sack she sewed together, and every year we get another box of Legos, and it would go in the sack, and we'd drag the sack out in the living room and dump them all out in the living room and just start making stuff, and that's what we did. And actually, one of the best Christmas gifts that we got year after year was from my mom's mom, my grandmother. She would just send a shoebox, and it would just be filled with crafty stuff, some glue and some paper and some tape and some scissors and whatever she threw in there. And that was just so exciting to open up that box with stuff that you could make stuff with. My dad was a woodworker, his dad was a woodworker. And so my dad had a fairly nice woodworking shop with all the tools to be able to build furniture and things like that in the garage area. And so very early on, I can remember even when I was 6 years old, playing with pieces of wood and learning how to hammer a nail into a piece of wood and even stepping on a nail, which was very traumatic at the time, and having to go to hospital or doctor or wherever we went to take care of the stepping on the nail. And so I learned woodworking and kept with woodworking when I moved down to the Gulf Coast. In high school, I did science fairs. Before high school, I did 4-H, and all of that, all this element of creativity associated with putting those things together. Went to Mississippi State University, got an engineering degree, got an offer to work on Mississippi coast, which I never expected as an engineer to be able to move back down to the coast and be able to work. I thought I was going to have to go somewhere where the engineering jobs were, but I bumped into a brilliant guy who was an engineer and started a small company down there. And he was interested in the type of technology that I was interested in doing, and he hired me. And so I spent the next 30 years doing design engineering down in the Pass Christian, Long Beach area, Mississippi.
What were some of the things you designed?
We worked mostly for the Navy. We built lots of electronics and things that went underwater and on submarines and on ships, and it was all design engineering for the government, basically.
Did you ever dream you'd do this?
No, it wasn't really in the plan. So I was doing woodworking. I was going around to yard sales and finding old pieces of antique furniture, really beat up pieces, and fixing them up. And then I got hooked up with an antique store and got an antiques booth and started becoming an antiques dealer and selling the pieces of furniture there. And so at that point I was coming around the material. I was in the antique stores, I was in the yard sales, and I was seeing all this old material. And sometimes people have just boxes and boxes of stuff that nobody wants. So it's really high quality material. Silver plate is a good example. I'd say 75% of the pieces in here have silver plate in them, and silver plate is usually a brass or a copper base to it, and they've coated it with a really thin layer of silver. And super high quality material. It's going to last hundreds of years. It's beautiful. It's usually beautifully worked, and every household had their set of silver plate at one time. Very few people want it anymore. They don't want to take care of it. They don't want to dust it. They don't want to eat off of it. They don't want to set it out the holidays. And so as you have estate sales and liquidations and families clearing out stuff, sometimes you can find a box with 20, 30 pieces of silver plate in it for dollars.
I bet you like going to those places as much as you like putting it together.
It is. I mean, picking is a big part of the appeal of this art. It's the treasure hunting, the picking, the exploring, The last time I was here at the museum, I went down to the Relics Antique Store in Tupelo.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. It's this humongous old railroad building right there on the tracks near downtown. And it's just filled with interesting things. And I spent a couple hours just wandering around in there looking at different things and picked up a few things to take back to my art studio.
Well, you've certainly made us look at junk in a different way.
Yeah.
Because when you pick out all the different things that you know in these pieces, it's like, whoa.
And generally, what I look for is longevity. So I try to put the pieces together so that they'll last 100 years. I try to use materials I know are going to last 100 years. I usually avoid things that degrade like plastics. I usually avoid electrification for the most part because usually electric things break down over time. The few times I will use electrification is in the clock mechs, so the time pieces, the time machine, the time flies pieces, those do have battery powered clock mechs in them that can be replaced. But over time they're going to break down, those things will break down.
I bet as a design engineer, the way things were made as opposed to the way they are made now is a real learning curve.
Yeah, so this is sort of a pushback against the throwaway culture. So you know, a lot of this stuff is given to us. People are clearing out places, they don't want it anymore. They don't want to throw it away because they know it's nice, but they have no idea what to do with it. And so I take that old stuff and try to make it into a new thing that can be used and enjoyed.
Well, I've noticed that there's layers of meaning in there. Do you start out with, oh, this is going to be this, or does that just evolve?
Yeah, no, I get that question often too. So the most common question I get is, how do you think of this? And that's the hardest one to answer. That, you know, to explain to somebody how to engage their creativity is a very complex subject. But with regards to how the piece starts, it usually starts with an element. And so, for example, on the Tracker Jacker, it started with that clock mech. I found that clock mech and I looked at it and immediately it reminded me of an insect face. And so it usually starts with that one little piece that generates that seed of an idea. And then I try to find all the rest of it so that the parts are consistent in the way they look and the materials that they're used from, and the scale is really important. So, you know, the wings have to be the right scale with the head, have to be the right scale with the body, have to be the right scale with the stinger, and that's what really makes the piece stand together, and it immediately, you look at it, you know what it is by getting the scale right. And so the process itself, the collection of all those items is fairly slow. It may take years to collect each of these items, and it goes into a box or into a shelf or into a cabinet drawer in my studio. And when I'm gathering them, I may not know what I'm going to do with them, but I know they're interesting or high quality or unusual, and I'll just put them in storage. And then when I have the seed piece, which in this case was the clock mech head, then I'll start going through all my drawers and boxes and things and try to find all the rest of it to put it together.
Yeah, I see that process, and that one in particular made me think of an old lighting fixture I have at home. Those legs.
Yeah, and most of it is lighting fixture, so it's a lamp base, it's chandelier legs, the body is from probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about maybe 6 different lamps, parts from 6 different brass lamps were put together to get the body of the bug.
Now, have you screwed these together or welded them together? Or?
It's mostly rivet construction, so riveting is an old technique. It's very strong. You can get rivets made out of different materials, so I can get rivets made out of aluminum, which are softer, steel, which has a tendency to rust, stainless steel, which is stronger and doesn't rust. And so for outdoor pieces, I'll use stainless steel rivets, for example, if I don't want the rust. In some cases, I want the rust. Some cases, I've got rusty elements, and I'll use the steel rivets so that over time they'll match. And It's very strong and it's very permanent, the rivets are, but they're also reversible, so if I change my mind on putting a rivet in or have a mistake and I need to back up a couple of steps, they can be drilled out and replaced. It's a fairly quiet craft. You can use hand manual rivet guns. Basically they squeeze the rivets into the holes and presses the pieces of metal together, and some screwdrivers and a drill to drill the holes. That's just a battery powered drill. And so it's a fairly small workbench and a fairly small set of tools to be able to put it all together.
You have a count of how many pieces you've made?
It's somewhere between 1,000 and probably 5,000 at this point. So it's I had a goal when I first started, which was more than 10 years ago, to try to produce at least 10,000 pieces. And for the first number of years, I tried to keep track of every piece. And I sort of lost track of keeping track of the list at some point. But generally, I produce several hundred pieces a year.
Wow. So you still have a full-time job kind of picking and making.
Yeah, yeah. And so on the trip up to the museum today, for example, we stopped at a couple of antique stores there on Highway 45, just after we came off of I-59, and picked up a couple of things. And when we head back later this weekend, we'll probably stop in at Jackson at Architectural Salvage Place that we like there, and they have a lot of really interesting things that they collect from old houses. And